Welcome to Chapter 4, Rational Choice Theory. By the end of this chapter, you should be able to understand several key ideas about rational choice theory and criminology. First, you'll be able to describe how rational choice theory developed over time and what thinkers influenced it. Second, we'll explore the main concepts behind rational choice, essentially how people weigh cost and benefits before acting. Third, you'll learn how evidence shows that many criminal decisions are actually rational and purposeful rather than random. Fourth, we'll look at situational crime prevention and the different strategies used to reduce opportunities for crime. Fifth, you'll analyze the concept of general deterrence, how the threat of punishment can discourage crime on a broader level. And finally, you'll understand the basics of specific deterrence, which focuses on preventing reoffending individuals who have already been punished. By the end, you'll have a solid foundation for understanding how decision-making plays a role in criminal behaviors. Here, we're looking at how rational choice theory developed. It begins with classical criminology, rooted in the work of Cesare Beccaria, who argued that people are rational and make decisions based on weighing cost and benefits. His ideas laid the foundation for what later became rational choice theory. Then we move to the more modern perspective called Thinking About Crime by James Q. Wilson. Wilson updated the classical ideas by emphasizing that criminals make deliberate, intelligent decisions. His work helped shape the contemporary version of rational choice theory, focusing on how offenders evaluate risks, rewards, and opportunities before committing a crime. Next, let's look at some of the key concepts in rational choice. First, offenders evaluate the risks of crimes. In other words, people tend to avoid committing a crime when they believe the risk, like getting caught or punished, are greater than the potential reward. Second, we have offense-specific crime. This means offenders make decisions based on specific details of the crime itself. For example, the target, location, timing, or security measures. They tailor their choices to the characteristics of that particular act. And then finally, there's offender-specific crime. This focuses on the individual. Offenders think about their own abilities and limits, like the skill, motives, needs, or fears, before deciding whether they can actually carry out a crime. Together, these ideas show that criminal decision-making involves both evaluating the situation and evaluating oneself. Now let's look at how offenders structure their criminality, or how certain personal and social factors shape their decision-making. First, peers and guardianship play a big role. Offenders may feel encouraged by peers or take advantage of situations where there's little supervision or protection. And second, there's the need for excitement and thrills. Some individuals are motivated by the adrenaline or rush that comes with committing a crime. And third, economic need or opportunity can influence choices. When someone sees a financial benefit or feels pressure from financial struggles, they may be more likely to take the risk. And finally, competence and experience matter. Offenders who feel confident in their skills or who have committed similar crimes before are more likely to believe that they can successfully carry out the act. These factors help explain why some people decide to commit crimes while others do not. And finally, let's look at how offenders structure the crime itself, the practical decisions they make before acting. First, they think about choosing the place of the crime. Offenders look for locations that offer good opportunities, low risk, and an easy escape. Next, they focus on choosing targets. This could be a person, a property, or an object. They evaluate things like vulnerability, value, and likelihood of getting caught. And lastly, offenders plan how they're going to get away. They consider escape routes, timing, and ways to avoid detection once the crime is done. All of these decisions show that criminal behavior often involves planning and strategy rather than impulse. It's easy to see rational thinking in crimes that involve planning and long-term gain, like organized schemes, financial fraud, or coordinated drug trafficking. Those clearly involve strategy and decision-making. But the bigger question is whether other types of crime, like drug use, violence, hate crimes, or sex crimes, are rational too. These acts often seem emotional, impulsive, or driven by deeper psychological or social issues. So this pushes us to think critically about the limit of rational choice theory. To analyze this theory, we have to consider both self-interest, the idea that people act to benefit themselves, and social concern, meaning how social pressures, emotions, or moral beliefs influence behavior. This section helps us examine whether rational thinking truly explains all types of criminal behavior or only certain kinds. Next, we're moving into situational crime prevention, which focuses on reducing the immediate opportunities for crime. The basic idea is that many crimes can be prevented when the environment makes offending harder or riskier. This happens in a few key ways. First, by making sure potential targets are well guarded, like better lighting, locked surveillance. Second, by controlling the means to commit a crime, such as limiting access to tools or weapons that could be used illegally. Third, by carefully monitoring potential offenders, whether through security staff, community presence, or technology. We also look at the idea of defensible space, which suggests that when areas are designed to increase visibility and ownership, crime goes down. And then finally, the craved model, which helps us understand what makes certain items attractive to thieves. Things that are concealable, removable, available, valuable, enjoyable, and disposable. Together, these concepts help explain how changing the environment can interrupt the decision-making process behind crime. All right, so let's look at the different crime prevention strategies used in situational crime prevention. First, we can increase the effort needed to commit a crime. Things like better locks, fences, or security systems make offending more difficult. Second, we can increase the risk of getting caught. This includes surveillance cameras, police presence, or attentive employees. Third, we can reduce the rewards of crime, for example, marking property, using ink tags in stores, or keeping valuables out of sight. Fourth, we can induce guilt or increase shame, which might involve strong social or community norms that discourage offending. Fifth, we can reduce provocation, such as minimizing crowding, frustration, or conflict that might trigger impulsive behavior. Sixth, we can remove excuses by posting rules clearly or enforcing policies consistently so offenders can't justify their actions. And finally, all of these strategies work together to reduce opportunities for crime altogether. These techniques focus on changing the environment so that crime becomes less appealing or more difficult to carry out. And finally, let's evaluate situational crime prevention by looking at its hidden benefits and hidden cost. Hidden benefits include things like diffusion, where crime prevention efforts reduce not just the targeted crime, but also related crimes in nearby areas. Another benefit is discouragement, where offenders give up because the environment looks too risky or effortful, even if specific measures weren't aimed directly at them. But there are also hidden costs. One is displacement, where crime doesn't stop, it simply moves to another location, time, or target. Another is extinction, meaning prevention strategies may work at first, but lose their effectiveness as offenders adapt. And finally, there's replacement, where offenders switch to a different type of crime that offers similar rewards, but is easier to commit. These points help us understand that while situational crime prevention can be effective, it isn't perfect and often brings both positive and negative side effects. Next, we're looking at general deterrence, which is based on the idea that people avoid crime because they fear the consequences. The core idea is that the fear of criminal penalties like arrest, fines, or prison convinces potential offenders that the pain of committing the crime outweighs any possible benefits. A key part of this involves perception. It's not just the actual likelihood of punishment that matters, but how likely people believe punishment is. If people believe they'll get caught, they'll less likely take the risk. We also know that not everybody responds to deterrence in the same way. Some individuals and some types of offenders are more deterrable than others. Factors like age, impulsivity, social environment, and prior experience with the justice system can affect how strongly someone reacts to the threat of punishment. So general deterrence relies on both the real and perceived certainty, severity, and swiftness of the punishment to reduce crime. Two important concepts within general deterrence are marginal deterrence and restrictive deterrence. Marginal deterrence refers to how effective different levels of punishment are compared to each other. In other words, it examines whether increasing the severity or certainty of punishment leads to a noticeable decrease in crime. Then restrictive deterrence, sometimes called partial deterrence, is a bit different. It refers to situations where the threat of punishment doesn't stop crime entirely, but it does reduce how often offenders commit it, or limits the severity of duration of the criminal behavior. So while general deterrence focuses on preventing crime altogether, these concepts help us understand the more nuanced way punishment can influence behavior. So looking at the relationship between punishment and deterrence, first is the certainty of punishment. Research consistently shows that when people believe they are likely to be caught, crime rates go down. In many cases, the presence and effectiveness of policy play a big role in increasing that sense of certainty. And second is the severity of punishment. While it might seem logical that harsher punishments would deter crime, the evidence shows that certainty matters far more than severity. Increasing punishment alone doesn't have much impact on people who don't think they'll actually be caught. And then finally, there's the swiftness of punishment, meaning how quickly consequences follow the criminal act. The closer the punishment is to the offense, the stronger its deterrent effect. So overall, deterrence works best when punishment is certain, swift, and only after those factors appropriately severe. Finally, let's evaluate how well general deterrence actually works. First, we consider rationality. General deterrence assumes people think rationally about consequences, but not all offenders make decisions in a logical or calculated way. Next, there's the issue of system effectiveness. Deterrence only works if the justice system is reliable, consistent, and able to enforce punishment. If people believe the system won't hold them accountable, deterrence breaks down. Another factor is that criminals often discount punishments. They may believe they won't get caught, or they may downplay the seriousness of the consequences, which weakens the deterrent effect. And finally, we know that some offenders and some types of crime are more deterrable than others. Planned economic crimes tend to be more responsive to deterrence, while impulsive or emotionally driven crimes are less influenced by the threat of punishment. Overall, general deterrence has strengths, but it also has its clear limitations. Specific deterrence focuses on the idea that punishment should be strong enough to prevent an offender from committing another crime in the future. The assumption is that if someone experiences serious consequences once, they won't want to repeat the behavior. In some cases, longer incarceration may delay reoffending simply because the person is removed from the community for a longer period. However, research also shows several problems with relying on harsh punishment. In some situations, the harshest treatment can actually increase crime rather than reduce it. Punishment can sometimes breed defiance, making offenders more resistant to authority instead of more compliant. And there's also the stigma that comes with severe punishment. Being labeled can make it harder for individuals to find jobs, housing, or social support, which can push them back towards crime. In addition, extremely harsh punishments can lead to psychological harm, which may further complicate re-entry into society. And finally, the deterrent effect is often negligible in communities where nearly everyone has a criminal record. In those environments, punishment loses its impact because it's seen as normal or expected. Overall, specific deterrence doesn't always work the way it's intended and sometimes has unintended consequences. Incapacitation is the idea that by keeping offenders confined, we eliminate their ability to commit further crimes in the community. And this is known as the incapacitation effect, the belief that removing offenders from society reduces crime by physically preventing reoffending. Today, more than 1 in every 100 adults is behind bars, which shows how heavily the U.S. relies on incarceration as crime control. However, the relationship between incarceration and crime isn't always straightforward. There have been periods where incarceration rates increased while overall crime was actually decreasing, suggesting other factors were influencing the drop in crime. At other times, we've seen crime rates rise even as incarceration rates were also rising, which raises questions about how effective incapacitation truly is on its own. So while incapacitation can prevent individual offenders from committing new crimes temporarily, its overall impact on crime trends is much more complex. Now let's look at how rational choice theory connects to criminal justice strategies. Research shows that focused crackdowns where police concentrate efforts on specific places, offenders, or problems are generally more effective than routine patrols. The idea is that targeted enforcement increases the certainty of punishment in the areas where it matters most. Then next we have focused deterrence, which involves pulling every possible deterrent lever. This means combining enforcement, community pressure, social services, and clear community communication to encourage offenders to stop their behavior. It's a coordinated approach aimed at increasing both the risk and the consequences of crime. And finally, many people are familiar with the 3 strikes and you're out laws, which mandate long sentences for repeat offenders. And while these laws appeal to the public concerns about safety, they may be premature or overly harsh, and research questions their overall effectiveness. In some cases, they may lead to unintended consequences like overcrowded prisons or disproportionate sentences. Overall, these strategies show how rational choice theory has influenced real-world crime control, but also how important it is to evaluate what actually works. All right, so some key takeaways from Chapter 4. Rational choice theory views crime as a decision-making process where offenders weigh risks and rewards. Criminal behavior is often purposeful, influenced by opportunity, skills, experience, and situational factors. Situational crime prevention focuses on reducing opportunities through environmental and practical strategies. General deterrence depends most on certainty and, to a lesser extent, severity and swiftness of punishment. Specific deterrence aims to prevent reoffending but can sometimes produce unintended negative effects. Incapacitation removes offenders from society but has mixed results when comparing incarceration rates to crime trends. Rational choice principles shape criminal justice strategies, especially focused deterrence and targeted enforcement.